Hello, I hope you enjoyed the film. Okay, so all the questions are going to be done via slido.com. That is the code that you would enter to key in your questions. I will then read it through the iPad. So we have a pre-recorded Q&A by two of the director, Isail and Suarli Mashakali. So we're going to listen to the recording, which is in Portuguese. And then after that, Juliano Gomez, who is my colleague in the programming team, would then host another Q&A with the other two directors, Carolina and Roberto, live. And he will translate some of the message from the video. So if we just play the video first, that'd be great. Thank you.
Bom dia, pessoal. Aqui é Sueli Machacali. Queria comentar, né, nosso filme, né, Nhag Manhã. Para vocês poderem ver, vão lá ver. Nosso filme é muito Bahia, traz muito a visão, né, como a aldeia é, e hoje continua, né, a violência contra nós, o preconceito contra nós, né, ela continua, né, a mesma coisa, né, nós, Machacali, a terra, a região, todo do Vale do Mucuri era a terra nossa. Hoje, né, a terra pertence a Dirê, porque hoje pertence a Dirê acha que a terra é deles, mas antigamente, realmente, né, quem era dono de verdade da terra era nós. E hoje, né, nós não tem nem direito de ir na terra, contar nossa história, contar nossa verdade, contar onde que teve a aldeia. Nós não podemos ter esse direito, porque a Dirê sabe que nós tem história em cima. Por isso que cada vez mais, né, a Dirê, quando vê algum indígena em cima da terra, eles assusta, porque eles sabem que nós tem história em cima dessa terra. É muito importante vocês ver, para vocês ter a visão, um pouco a visão, como que é hoje a situação do povo Machacali. Bye, um abraço para todos.
Pessoal, vai checar Isael Mascari. Quero convidar vocês. Hoje vai passar o nosso filme, né? Vai passar hoje, por isso que eu tô convidando vocês para olhar o nosso filme. Esse filme que nós fizemos foi o ano passado. Por isso que nós estamos convidando vocês para olhar esse filme, porque antigamente essa terra é nossa, território, é nosso território é grande. Hoje nós não temos terra pequena. Hoje nós temos terra pequena, nós tudo preso, né, dentro do curral, igual o curral, né? Nós não tem lugar para caçar, pescar, mas antigamente essa terra é Varumucuri, é território do povo Machacari. Por isso que nós fez esse documentário, né? Esse filme para escola indígena e não indígena também tem que aprender o nosso território, né? Onde tem cidade é terra de Machacari. Onde tem aldeia até passado, mas hoje a terra é muito pequena. Nós não tem como pescar, caçar, colher fruta, mas antigamente a terra de Mascari não tem limite, mas hoje tem limite, né, para nós andar. Mas antigamente não, a terra é liberdade para nós. Bye, obrigado.
Great. And now we will have Juliano Gomez, who would introduce our two panel on the screen. Hi. Can you hear
Hello,
us?
hi Keela.
Hi, Juliano. How are you?
Oh, great to see you. I wish
Nice.
I could be there too.
I know. We wish you were here too. Hello, Roberto and Carolina.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Juliano, I'll leave it to you to introduce the panel and yeah, you can take over. And then if there's any questions from the audience, I'll read it off the iPad.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here, talk with Carolina and Roberto. I will translate a bit the message we just seen, and then we talk here with them. Okay. Uh, Sueli, the first filmmaker who just sent us a message, she was saying that the film you've just seen, it's just the evidence of how the violence, the prejudice has been the same for centuries in Brazil against the Machacali people in the place which is called Vale do Mucuri, which originally was from the Machacali people, and now which was for some centuries, it's been stolen by white men, and they don't have now the right to to explore, to live in their own land, and so the film is somehow important to present and to communicate their truth, their own stories. And she said at the end that the presence of indigenous people, native people, she said, above the earth, of the ground, it threatens white people because indigenous people have and know the story of their land and have that own story, their own perspective on that place, and which is originally uh, their place. And Israel, the second filmmaker, he said he invited us to see the film. He's very happy with this show, which is in fact uh, the very first physical premiere of the film. And Israel said that they have made it last year, 2020, and he says about the territory that the Mashakali people, they don't have their land anymore. They have today like a very tiny piece of land where they cannot fish or hunt or be in a comfortable situation. So they made the film for everybody to know that's their territory, and to tell the story of that territory. And in the old days, their land didn't have these limits. I don't know if Carolina and Roberto want to add something that maybe I couldn't catch on Israel and Sueli's words, or we just begin our conversation now. What do you think?
I think it was great, Juliano. I would just add the final words of Israel that land is their freedom, which I really like when I hear also. But it was great.
Nice. Uh, well, it's this film. I think it's a very special film, and it's like also a film within the Mashakali filmography. There was another film in a program last year in Sheffield Online, with which was the, I don't know how you translate that. Is the Spirit Women?
The
How
women's
the English
spirit.
title? The Women's Spirit, yes.
Yeah.
And there are at least like 30 or maybe 40 years of indigenous cinema taking place in Brazil. Indigenous filmmakers, which there were some presence in Sheffield with Video nas Aldeias too. So we have nowadays, especially I think in the last decade, like a rich panorama of indigenous cinema, or where with different singularities. And Machacali cinema, it's one of the most interesting, I think, being made today. So if you can, like provide some context about how this film was made and how you began your collaboration with the Machacali, that would be great.
Robertinho,
Carol,
eu vou falar então, depois você
Carol,
completa.
yeah.
So we've been working together with Sueli, Israel, and his Hamlet, with his people since 2009. So it's been 12 years. We've been working together and making films. Israel has always filmed since 2005. He started to film, and first he used to borrow cameras from the researchers that used to go to his community, and he got lessons with Divino Chavante, another indigenous filmmaker, and has always liked to film his rituals and the religious part of his people. So it's been like that. So for the first time, we decided to make a film that would talk about this history of to get in touch with white people, because Israel and Sueli has always wanted to film their own culture. They always wanted the filmmaking to contribute to their history, to their possibilities to create documentations of their stories, because they have always documented their stories through their songs, their chants, and their stories. But filmmaking is now another tool, so they can register a little bit of the rituals and a little bit of the knowledge of the old people. So for the first, we made almost like 5 or 6 films already. In last year, in 2019, we got this financial aid from the government, local government, Belo Horizonte City, make this film that would talk about a little bit about the history of getting in touch with white people and the urgency to have their territory demarcated, you know. So Robertinho, you can add.
Yeah, we've been uh, dreaming about this film for a while, since we started doing these first video workshops in their villages. And in 2010, I guess it was the first time when we first thought about making a film to tell the story of how their land has been stolen during more than 4 centuries of permanent contact with white people in this region, which is very close from where the first Portuguese arrived in the south coast of Bahia. And it's curious, as Carolina said, because most of their previous films were all very interested on their rituals and their spirits as Yamihei. And it was also a bit curious that Yamihei came right before This Land Is Our Land, because we believe both films are somehow a kind of diptychus, whereas one filmed the ritual and in all their effervescence, of what really interests them daily in their villages. The other turns the camera to the enemy and to what surrounds all that vibrant culture that they have preserved, in missing a better word, but throughout these centuries.
Sorry, I was muted. I'll begin again. Um, I would like to pick something that Carolina said that for me is very important. In Brazilian cinema, I think this is not the very first film who did that, but I think it's kind of a landmark in indigenous cinema that this film like presents a perspective on the white Brazilian people and the like an ethnography of white made by the Machacali here, and it's like it also provides doing that a very interesting idea of time, because at the same time this is a very contemporary film, something that's happening right now, and through the film we see that this is not very far from 1, 2, 3 centuries ago. So, if you could comment a bit about that, I don't know, white ethnography, if to make a new word, the film does. It's very interesting, and it's not that frequent to see this kind of perspective in documentaries, and I think this is really interesting. Take the film really does.
Well, I will start now. Um, it's great that you use that word that I really like from Michele Mattiusi, I guess, Brazilian artist, whitenography. That's a very great concept, I think, because we've been I myself am an anthropologist as well, and we've been working with them for these years, and there's something that also reminds me of this another idea of an American anthropologist called reverse anthropology, also, which is the idea that the people with whom we've been working and collaborating, they not only have their own ideas on their story, on their history, but they also have their own ways of telling that story. And I think that the Machacali, with their songs, their chants, and their rituals, they are performing history as well. And so, if you remind in Yamihei, for example, there are those otter spirits that arrive in the village and are compared to soldiers. And they are spirits that are compared to the white people as well, because they are violent and they come to destroy and to kill everyone in their village. So in a way, this was also an attention to follow them throughout these trails, was also following them throughout these trails of their history, which is also very connected to the space. So I think you have observed the thing with the time, and usually talking to the Machacali, they always refer a certain time to a certain space, to a certain place where they used to be, and where the chants make a kind of and it's not spiralar timing. Also, I think it's a good idea to what happened there a long time ago and what they will not forget because they remember throughout their chants. So somehow this was also all we had. The material we had was their memories to visit those places during the film.
Carolina, want to add something?
No, you were talking, and I was thinking that like history go by circles, and the indigenous people faced very bad times when the white people first arrived here, and sometimes the history gets a little better, and sometimes it gets worse. And nowadays we're facing a very bad political times here in Brazil, that the federal government is like facing against the indigenous people, doing whatever they can do to 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 do bad, like to take the small pieces of land these people have, they want to take, and they want them to kill everybody. So we're facing a very bad political times, and it makes this film much more important, like to to get light for to illuminate this very difficult historical time the indigenous people are facing here in Brazil. It's been bad, very bad in the past, but it's still very bad right now.
Okay. I would like to make just one more questions, and if Kila has after this one has anyone any comment any participation from the audience, that will be very welcome. So I made my one more question here. Uh, Something that I observe in Brazilian indigenous cinema and that also I find in this film is that it's frequent that the films uh, somehow they mix different techniques and approaches in filmmaking. I think this film does that. I mean, you have like archive footage, you have like very direct and confrontational situations, and you have also like I don't know some more mythological scenes and ritual scenes, the chants, uh, and you know what I mean. I think the film keeps changing itself, its language, its approach through all through the film. Uh, there's some heterogeneity in the approaches relating to filmmaking. You know, that's not a film. This kind of the style keeps changing. You know, although it's we can say it's like a pedestrian film, and it's also mourning film. You know, it's the dead people are there, their name written there. But I like you to comment a bit on that internal differentiation. You know, and I think this is very interesting, and it's something I can find in a bit different ways in indigenous cinema in Brazil. You know, that 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 changing style. No, the next scene is a bit different, and the next one's a bit different, and that's the way it's done. So if you can comment about that, because I think this is a contribution to documentary language. I see. You know.
Yeah, the first the thought we had, because to talk about their lands we have to go to the past. So we were working with adults, but they're not that old. So Israel and Sueli, for example, they used to sing chants that talk about places they have never met, or they met when they were children. So when we had this group to visitate some places that old people talked about, that their songs talked about, we had to register that important time of those people meeting places they have always heard of, but they have never met. So it was the first time Sueli and Zaya was getting to those places, and we believed that we had to have this language of documentary registering these these encounters of people and places. But when we made the whole trip, when we saw the material, we had this thought that we had to contextualize that some of the happenings that we had registered could not be understood by people that had never been there, that don't know about Machacali history. So we thought we had to to talk about that place to people who don't know that place. So we thought that the film had to talk about the context abroad, outside the material registering that we could get shoot in our travels. So we had a lot of tries and those different types of languages of attempted tries to talk about that place from outside the internal shooting. So we had to contextualize that place. So at the end, we had this film that mixed a lot of attempts to talk about it, to talk about this place from the internal perspective that could also talk about an outside perspective that could bring people that who don't know about this context a little bit close to it.
Right. Roberto, you want to add something?
No, I think we could move to the other questions.
Great. So I'll
Right.
just read the question that I have from Sylvia Harvey. Sylvia asks, have there been any legal initiatives intended to establish land rights? She also made a comment and said, I guess not under the present government. Thanks for the filmmakers. I mean, thank you is what she's asking me to say to you. Sorry.
Well, can we answer the question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay,
Please.
okay. There have been throughout the last century a few initiatives to demarcate Mashakali lands, but those legal and state initiatives, if I understood well the question, they were always they have never considered the entire land recognized by them as their original land. Of course, that could be much bigger than the Brazilian state could actually demarcate nowadays. But I mean the very surroundings of the actual land where we visited through doing the films. Those lands, those places we're visiting, they were not far away from their demarcated land. So those are the main places they are reivindicating nowadays, recently. And since since their lands have been, they live now in one of the the smallest indigenous lands, demarcated indigenous lands in Brazil. They live in some like 6,000 acres of land, which is really small, and their land have been all devastated. They have no forest, they have no river, and so the Brazilian state was the main responsible for that, because much of those lands that were stolen by former Brazilian Brazilian state functionaries who have divided the land among them, mostly during the 20th century. So nowadays, as you said, we are under a government who's one of the main of his most famous um, quotes was that he was not going to demarcate not 1 millimeter of indigenous land in Brazil. But that's not only what this government is doing now, because those lands who have been already demarcated, most of them in the Amazon, they are now being invaded by miners, illegal miners, and loggers. So what's happening now in the Amazon is exactly what has happened in the Mashakali territory in the 19th and 20th centuries. So they are somehow a mirror of what the future of indigenous people in Brazil and mostly in the Amazon are for if we keep this kind of policy that is completely anti-indigenous under and that this government has just given a very frightening shape, a body to these things that are, as we know, very that comes from the there are in the regions of what we call Brazil.
Great, thank you so
Right.
much. That was the only question I have, Juliano.
I don't know if we have time for something more. I think we have like 25 minutes already. Should should should, should I ask something more?
If you have another question, we can have another question.
Right. Well, let me see. Yes. How the something very objective. This film, when it began, when you start shooting, how long it took to shoot and to edit. If you could talk about the process, I mean, and also the way you work with Isaiah Sueli. That's interesting because you have four directors, and so the forms of this collaboration. I think it's an interesting issue for us to talk about.
As Roberto said before, this film began 2010 when we were making another film, and we had this plan that this subject was very urgent to become a film. So only in 2017 we could have this project, like have financial government for it to happen. Here in Brazil, it's very difficult to make films. We don't have support, we don't have resources, and as bad as the political context is, as bad as our artistical possibilities are too. So the idea of this film is very old, and we could only achieve it in 2020 when we ended to edit it. But we continue with other plans, like many of this material we shot could not be in the film, so we have other plans to make other films about Machacali land that talks about more recent history, because they're still facing problems to be able to live in a land that is theirs. They just moved from the place they were living. Now they're trying to establish in another land. So the problems with the land still exist. So we want to make other films also to keep talking about the subject until they can have a piece of forest to be able to live as their culture demands.
Yes, I will just add a little bit that, well, me and Carolina, we've met in the Forum Doc. It's a documentary and ethnographic film festival that happens here in Belo Horizonte, Minas Gerais, Brazil. And it was a kind of, there we had contact with most of Brazilian indigenous cinema during the last few years, like 20 years. The festival has now 25 years, right? So there also was where Israel had this first workshop with Divino Tserewahu. So it's a space of meeting with indigenous filmmakers and indigenous films. And that was how for the first time, I asked to join this first project of indigenous video workshop at Israel and Sueli's village in 2010 with Carolina and another friend, Renata Otto, an anthropologist who was coordinating this workshop and that has directed this film with them in 2011. And since then, well, we stay there in their house. They have been always hosting us in their villages. After that period, I also became an anthropologist and I've been working with them, especially in their village and in their house for 10 years now. So during this time, I think most of these films are like connected one to another and to this long period of relationship, and that has also another there are not only films but many other projects together. And this recent project is Our Sueli. They've left right after we've released This Land Is Our Land. They've left the reservation where they were living when they filmed Yamin, a reservation where there was no river, to go to another land in the middle of the pandemic. And they are now facing a really, really difficult time fighting for a land with a river, where they plan to build this project called a school forest, village forest school, something like that, which is a place where they want to exchange with another filmmakers and artists. But because Sueli and Israel, they are also artists. Sueli is going to be at the Bienal of São Paulo this year. Israel won the Pipa Prize, which is one of the most important contemporary art prizes in Brazil. So their work has been unfolding in different languages, in different platforms. So that's a bit how it works. And when this film, especially, I was there before in their village, and we had drawn this map together of the places we would like to visit before going. The film was shot during a one single trip of around 20 days. We had a van, and we traveled to all these places every day, going to one or two of these places that we had mapped before together. And this time, Carolina was, for the first time, as she said, she was with the camera, as she wasn't in the other films, in the past films. But we felt that this was also a bit natural, because Sueli and Israel, they were conducting and conducing us throughout, and the other elders that was going with us in front of the cameras. And this also has, sometimes you don't really know when is Carolina and when is Israel or Sueli filming or with the camera, because also I think Carolina, as we are using to say in many different occasions, Carolina learned a lot of how to film with the work of Israel and Sueli. And I think that's why it's possible to have such a connected, a real collaborative filmmaking process. And I think on my side, I was most of the times as a Mashakali speaker and working with them and trying to plan with them where we were going, and giving also some of these ideas, such as the interventions with the writing interventions, which also for me is a kind of contemporary art dialogue within the film, like the moment when they write in that place, that the very title of the film, that is This Land Is Our Land.
Great. Well, that's it. Thank you a lot, Carolina. Thank you a lot, Roberto. Thank you, Sheffield audience. Thank you, Kila. And well, there's going to be another conversation about the film in some days. So check the program of Sheffield DocFest. And thank you all.
Thank you so much for joining us today, guys.